Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Philosophical Liberal on Substack. Good morning, Joia. How are you doing today?
Good morning. It's almost good afternoon. I can't believe that we're almost halfway through the day, but it's a special day that we're even getting this chance to meet earlier. I don't know if our audience knows that a lot of times we end up recording this late at night at the end of the day, but I think it's a perfect topic too for us to take advantage of a gorgeous end of summer day.
Yes, well, and I was going to say, if you can't tell from our backgrounds and from the lighting, this is a special setting for both of us here on the eve of Labor Day weekend. So we thought before everyone runs out to enjoy their last gasps of unofficial summer, because I always like to say that summer technically runs till the equinox in late September. But for most of us, the calendar of Labor Day usually marks the end. So we thought we would bring it outside, bring in the all the senses of nature, because today's topic is about mind-body integration. And as you know, if you've been following along with us, we're working our way through our statement on philosophical liberalism on the website, and we are well into Article 1 now, which is kind of our starting point of foundations in human nature at its best. We've gone through already our core archetype of the creator trader as the ultimate both and integration of competing dualities and aspects of human nature. We covered in our last session how we are both the most individual and the most social being, and now our next both and integration that we drew out in our statement as core to understanding human nature at our best is this notion of human beings being beings of both mind and body. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And Joy, I know you had some great things to say on that, but before I hand it over to you, I just want to read to set the tone, read what we actually wrote on this integration. So we had said, well, I'll just always start with the preface for the rest of this Article 1 sessions of how we kind of introduced it in our opening paragraph. We talk about the creator-trader approach involves integrating seeming polarities of identity, a both and perspective, in order to realize our fullest complex potential. Those identities most relevant to a flourishing free society include, and then for mind and body, we wrote, mind and body, humans are integrated beings of mind and body who must strive to think, feel, and act in harmony in order to achieve happiness. So with that, Joya, I'll hand it over to you to dive in further into what we mean by that.
So I know that ultimately we want to take this concept and connect it back to ideas of freedom and what does it mean to live in a free society, to our whole project of being a philosophical liberal. But this is clearly a philosophical issue that underlies our entire human experience. And so I even wanted to begin with one of my favorite quotes about mind body integration, which has nothing to do with politics, but instead comes from the field of medicine. And this was a quote from the pioneer of modern nursing, Florence Nightingale, who noticed way back in the 19th century in ways that I don't think we have yet fully appreciated or implemented into our current contemporary medical practice, the importance of the integration of mind and body for wellness, for healing and recovery. So, this was a quote from her. She said, "The effect in sickness of beautiful objects, and especially brilliancy of colors, is hardly to be appreciated. People say the effect is only on the mind. It is no such thing. The effect is on the body too. Variety of form and brilliance of color in the objects presented to patients are an actual means of recovery." And I know you and I were talking offline before this about how even nowadays, when we talk about words, when we think of hospitals in 21st century America, and we use words like sterile and clinical, and there is a real way in which we obviously want our hospitals to be germ free. We want them to be incorporating the most rigorous scientific testing and clinical means, that term of clinical. But as you know, that when we even say that, I'm sure as people are hearing this, when we talk about things being sterile and clinical, there is that sense of it being devoid of color, devoid of life, devoid of vibrancy, and how important that is for the human experience. And as Florence Nightingale pointed out, that it really is not just an effect on the mind, it truly is an effect on the body. And I love that you and I today really have embodied this whole approach in how we've shown up for what we're doing today. Even I was reading this, I was seeing in the background this gorgeous mural that someone created here behind you. You'll have to tell us maybe a little bit about it, but I can see that you're clearly somewhere in Manhattan, and someone even took perhaps the drab colors that we think of the city skyline and reimagined it with as she was saying, with this idea of variety of color and form and the way that these objects are presented.
Yeah, well said. And in typical urban city fashion, there are all kinds of machines running in the background and humming that I don't even know what they are, but I can barely hear myself. So let me know if the audio is good and you can hear me just
It's
fine.
perfect.
All right, well, I'll just talk and hope that it comes out all right for everybody. But yeah, as you mentioned, I'm sitting here in a courtyard in Manhattan right now, and I have this beautiful mural behind me. And like you said, it kind of has taken just the almost background normal cityscape, literally, that we're used to, whether you live in New York or any other major American city. They all have a skyline of some sort, but turned it into just an amazing, rich pop of color here just to enliven what would otherwise be, and I showed Joia with the scan of the camera before, what would otherwise be a fairly drab and dark gray brick concrete, kind of building surrounding. And
Can you show the audience this
yeah,
panoramic view of the buildings?
yeah,
Show us.
if everyone doesn't get dizzy here. So this is the mural. It kind of wraps around the entire space. And just really, I mean, it's really amazing what just even a little bit of color can do to a space, because this is kind of what the buildings above look like. And, they're very utilitarian, very basic and traditional urban style kind of mid-rise buildings. But, all of that kind of red, brown, and gray brick, stone, or concrete material that most American cities are made of. And so given my background and my primary calling is in architecture, real estate, and placemaking, I'm particularly attuned to these issues. And I would say that, frankly, it's one of the reasons I think I was always drawn to architecture and buildings is because they are kind of the ultimate expression of both really the mind and the body aspects of humanity. Capital A architecture, as I like to call it, architecture at its best that aspires to art, which means expressing kind of a deeper abstract idea, and done and executed stylistically very well and beautifully and proportionally. I think really does rise to a level of bridging between a conceptual idea in the human mind and then literally manifesting it in stone, steel, glass, and 3D form. So, and it's also a functional object. A building is something we use to conduct any form of human activity, and all of them ultimately. I like to think and say that all of human life happens in a space or a place. And so architecture is the art of place and space making, in my view. And to me, that just is the ultimate integration, because we as human beings are not just in our heads in a kind of uh, metaphorical ivory tower or literal ivory tower, but we are also beings who need to live in the world. And so to me, architecture, one of the things I love most about it, and then real estate, the business of architecture and place making, is that it is transforming ideas in our heads into physical concrete form. And so for me, I find it one of the highest, if not the highest, forms of art and creativity, precisely because it is, you know, it serves both of these conceptual, abstract, but also these physical and concrete purposes. and I think all art really at its best does that, but architecture kind of takes it to a next 3D kind of level. So I love how you invoked the hospital example of the beautiful quote you read, because I have often used that concept of sterile environments and the language of sterility when I think about environments that either inspire you and are very colorful and uplifting versus that are kind of deadening. I think this speaks to the fact that we are beings of both conceptual and physical need, that even our physical surroundings can have an emotional and psychological effect on our mental state.
I obviously could not agree more. And it's fascinating to me how this is one aspect where I do feel that here in the West, we haven't caught up with what in the Eastern tradition, I believe, was obvious for centuries, going back to ancient times, going back to the yin and yang of appreciating that we need both mind and body and their approach to health and healing. So I think it's almost fitting that you found a beautiful man-made created space, and we didn't even plan this, but it all worked out, that you found this beautiful man-made created space and I found a space that just taps into the beauty of nature, which again
Yeah.
is just, and there's of course you and I have talked offline, maybe we can even have a conversation here someday when we think about places like Central Park, is my favorite example of, I always call it man-made nature, and often it is my favorite kind that when human beings think about how they can take the natural environment, how they can take the trees and the water and the grass and shape it in a way that brings out the best experience for human beings. And Chris, I know I don't know if our audience does, but I'm sure if you've never even been to New York City, you must have seen and know that Central Park is this giant rectangle that was designed to fit in the very artificial grid that is Manhattan. But when the architects and landscapers were developing it, they purposefully put in winding paths, and you can't just cut a straight line. I can say sometimes as a busy New Yorker, it's a frustrating thing when you just want to cut straight across the park from east to west, but they don't allow you to do that. And ultimately, I do appreciate that it's in a way that supports humanity the best. It forces us to slow down and to appreciate the beauty that surrounds us. And one of the things that I wanted to share next, even incorporating some of these more Eastern insights, was to lead us through something like a meditation centering practice. One of the key insights that they clearly got in the Eastern cultures was even the ability to connect mind and body through the breath. So some of our audience might know, I work as a coach, but part of my background is I've done training in Pilates, in yoga, in Tai Chi, in all of these mind body practices. And significantly, all of these practices think about the breath as that connecting element between mind and body, because breath clearly it is vital to what we need to survive. It's vital to our bodies to be able to inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide, but it's also unique amongst all of our bodily processes in that it does happen automatically when we're not paying attention to it, but we do also have the ability to pay attention to the breath and to control our breathing with the mind. And this is even one of the key insights that the ancients understood and we moderns, I believe, do need to understand more than ever, is this importance of attention. We live now in a 21st century culture where attention might be our most precious resource. It's the one where we are just constantly bombarded by stimuli and distraction, and so that ability to hone your attention. And I like to use the analogy that attention is like a muscle. The more you attempt to use it and attempt to develop it like a skill, the better you get. And again, attention is just another beautiful example where attention is ultimately a result of bodily processes. We already know that if you're hungry, if you're angry, if you're tired, that all of these things can make it so much harder to pay attention. If you're depleted from being overstimulated, these are bodily things that affect your attention, even though we think of attention as being perhaps one of the core aspects of what it means to be a full, autonomous, mentally strong human being. So, if you're ready, I would love to lead us through just a short little practice, and hopefully, this will be beneficial to the audience too.
Sure. I mean, I have so many things to say on what you just said, but let's do your exercise first to keep with the theme.
Yeah. So, I would like to invite everyone, wherever you are, to find a moment to sit in wherever you're sitting, to really feel into your seat, to press your feet firmly into the floor underneath you. If you feel comfortable, to close your eyes or just let your gaze fall gently to the floor and to really bring that attention to your breath, to focus on the sensation of your inhalation, to try, if you're able, to deeply inhale through the nose. And what is that sensation of the breath as it passes through the nostrils, in through the back of the throat, into the body? And then also to take a nice, deep, long exhale, as slow and steady and as long as you can make the breath, and to focus on that sensation of the breath. Is that air warm, cold? Does it feel tight or free and flowing? And then take a moment to bring awareness to each of your senses. Let's start with your sense of touch. So, again, you might be feeling that pressure through your feet, through where you're sitting. Take a moment to notice where your hands are in space. What are they perhaps touching or coming against? Bring attention to your sense of smell. And smell and taste are often connected. Is there something in the room, in the environment where you are? Here where I am, people can see it is this gorgeous summer day, and I can smell there's somebody's mowing the lawn here. There's that pungent grass smell that I can feel even in the back of my throat. Bring attention to your sense of sound. I think Chris was sharing that before he could hear all of the bustling noise of the city. I can hear wind rustling through the reeds next to me. And if your eyes are closed, you can gently open them and take a moment to appreciate that you can see color and shape and form. Here where I am today, there's this beautiful play of light and shadow underneath the vines where I'm sitting. There are so many different shades and colors of green as the sun hits the different leaves in different places. There's a beautiful, bright, clear blue sky. And then when you're ready, you can bring your attention back to this conversation. And I'm really excited to turn it over to Chris to start to hear even some of the insights you had before. But even just going through this exercise, it just reminds me how much we really are inseparably mind and body. As I was going through that whole exercise, how could you even we do often try to put them in one bucket or the other, but they are always so integrally connected. And it's so wonderful, I think, when we have that moment to appreciate how much it always is both mind and body when we're human beings.
Yeah, here, here, well said. And you may notice I had to change environments, but I'm trying to keep the color there in the background for you. Thank you for that exercise. I love it. And it's I think you and I were both coming to mindfulness and meditation practices somewhat synchronously. I think you
Mhm.
probably preceded me and actually perhaps even inspired me, but I've been doing incorporating mindfulness meditation into my own daily habits for about the last 6 years, and I couldn't agree more or emphasize and recommend more uh, how what we just did, the exercise Joya took us through, that's a perfect demonstration of what it typically entails, and then just how beneficial it can be, particularly on this very topic of better mind body integration. And, going through it just now, especially once I had to move indoors because my battery was running out. Um, there are multiple other people in this room who are conducting their own conferences. There's music playing. So I had a just bombardment of sensory overload and distractions, you might say. And yet, thankfully, because I've been practicing it for 6 years, I could tune out a lot of it and, to your point, really focus my attention, my mental attention, onto then the physical of the breathing and just that very act. It trains your mind in the act of focusing and attention, because ultimately, you know I think one of the brilliant insights that mindfulness and meditation help us tap into is that ultimately mind body integration is the act of focusing your awareness and your perception in a direction you want to, and ultimately, ideally, into productive ones that serve your mental and physical health. But I just loved that. And I thank you for using this as an example to draw out this very point that we are, as we see, beings of both mind and body, that at any point in time, even the physical sensations we are experiencing are ours to choose by the way we direct our mental energy. And I couldn't think of a better demonstration of how the two go hand in hand. Oftentimes we think, and I think we are born into and then raised amongst a world where the leading schools of philosophy and ideas that govern our understanding of the world often choose a kind of set up a false dichotomy of these two, that say human beings, we are, that it's our soul and our spirit that really matters, kind of, i.e., the mental domain, and that we're just the body is just a container for that, and it's really about overcoming that to release kind of the real spiritual form, whether it's Plato or religion or and various other philosophers who have argued that view. And then there's then the alternative, is the kind of materialist only view that says we are just a clump of cells and kind of indiscriminate and deterministic neurons firing, and have no control over that. I mean, I think any sentient human being who has ever made a decision at any point in their life can self-evidently say that's not the case, but yet many people operate under that premise. So I think this is just another example of our overall theme here in Article 1 of the both and integrations as the proper alternative to the false either or dichotomies, particularly when it comes to understanding human nature and human character, that this hopefully provides a good antidote towards overcoming, again, often the conflicts that are set up, the inner conflicts and the unnecessary, the false conflicts that taking either of those viewpoints on human nature often sets up for humans unknowingly and perhaps unwittingly oftentimes. So yeah, the more we can see ourselves as integrating the two, the better. And that's where exercises like mindfulness and meditation can really be helpful. And I kind of stumbled into it, or like I said, was inspired by your work to delve into it more. And I can't emphasize how great it has been to help me on this point.
I will share that this has definitely been an ongoing journey in my life. And I think it is true that, well, I will share, at least from my perspective, that even grasping this concept of mind body integration theoretically doesn't mean that I don't need to actually put in the attention to make sure that I am fulfilling that integration in how I show up in the world. So I will share that I was raised in a religious background where it was the mind, the spirit was that which was eternal and close to God and that which was to be valued. And the body was at best irrelevant and at worst sinful and evil. And so I was taught really even to shun that which was of the body. And thankfully, by the time I was a teenager, I started learning more about different kinds of philosophies that were more about integrating mind and body. But interestingly enough, even though, as I shared, I had a theoretical appreciation, let's say by the time I was going off to college, about the importance of or the truth of integrating mind and body, it wasn't always easy to do in practice. So I went on the path of studying to become a college professor and found myself so much in the life of the mind as they call it, and going down that path where, I mean, it's somewhat of a joke in academic circles where there are these professors who say that, their body is just a meat suit vehicle to get them around, to get their big brains around from conference to conference, I suppose. And just realizing that that was certainly not the kind of life that I wanted to live, because to live this fully human life is to do one where we really do strive to maximize what we can with the mind, with our attention, with our conceptual abilities, with our abstractions, and also simultaneously to appreciate and develop our bodies, to engage in physical exercise, to eat well, to move, to get sleep, to do all of the things that are part of our physical nature. And then recognizing that, even as I've described it here, it makes it sound like one of these is all of the mind and one of these is all of the body. But when we're talking about human beings, you know, even my professors couldn't have been doing the complex mental work they were doing if they totally did neglect their bodies. You need, then the better your body functions, the better your mind functions. And simultaneously with the body, there's no way to think about the health of the body without thinking about the effect of our thinking. There's a way in which our emotions are that critical linchpin where when we think about our emotions, there's clearly a mental component to it, but there's always also a physical component as well. And so much of our quote unquote physical sickness is just a symptom of our emotional, mental problems and distress. There's that catchphrase of the issues are in the tissues, that whatever our anxieties and emotional stressors and problems are, that these always end up showing up in real bodily manifestations. So just again to reiterate this point, that for human beings it's always both and mind and body. And I do think that the more we can try to make a point to recognize that it always is mind and body, that the more fully that we are living as human beings.
Well put, and I would just add on to that, that I think this highlights that once we, and you're right, and I certainly don't mean to suggest, even noting our respective histories and experiences in this domain, that it is easier, that we have mastered it, far from it, even after 6 years of practice for me, and I think, probably a little bit longer for you.
It's always a
It's
practice.
always a practice, and even when we just did that exercise, I mean, I was able to focus my mind, but it was in and out. It was not consistent, and it requires effort, and that's okay. It is an ongoing process. The process of focusing your mind is a eternal process as long as we're alive. That is the fundamental choice we each face at every given second we're alive. And so that's it does take practice to grasp this on the uh kind of practical level, like you said, not just the theoretical. But I think once you do start to grasp certainly the theoretical point, and then ultimately practice it in your own life, then you start to see the importance of maintaining and building up the health, both your mental health and your physical health. Because once you recognize that our proper and our best are, remember, this is Article 1 is human nature at its best, that our best nature as beings who need to both think and act to survive and thrive. We need equal health and attention to both. So I like to just use this topic as a plug for an emphasis for the importance of maintaining both your physical and mental health. Here again is where I think we often see out in the culture this false dichotomy kind of playing out and kind of manifesting itself, in that you see many people go really heavy into athleticism or physical health and training, but then, kind of putting their brains on autopilot or not tending to their emotional issues and anxieties or concerns, and or the opposite, people who live up in their minds and just spin in their emotions, but then maybe, have bad physical habits, eating, exercise, whatever. That's, and this is not a judgment, it's more just, I think, an observation on the sad consequences of this mentality that sees either our minds at war with our bodies or vice versa. In fact, it's the opposite. We need them both to survive and thrive. And so maintaining the health and proper functioning of both is the way we become most human.
So let's turn now and think about what this means for politics and what this means for freedom. I know this is a point that you love to stress, how freedom has to mean both the freedom to think and the freedom to act, precisely because we are these beings of mind and body. I want to turn it over to you because I know you have so many thoughts about this very issue.
Yeah, uh, at the intention to avoid, being kind of infinitely repetitive, I think you summed it up really well right there, which is that because once you grasp this fact that we are beings of mind and body, and that we need to be able to think and act, as we've talked about throughout this series, it follows logically that our nature requires that we then have the freedom to think and to act. And I guess maybe the only other nuance I'll add to it is that we've talked about this before, but because, you know, while our nature requires that we both think through how the world works and understand how it works so that we can then take proper action to find the food we need and build the shelter we need to survive and ultimately to thrive in the world, we're not given a rule book for how to do that. We have to figure it out. We as human beings are not omniscient, nor are we infallible. And I think that's a critical point to understand for two reasons. One, I think it gives us the grace and space, as I like to say, to allow every human being the ability to get things wrong or to not know the proper way to go. That's part of just the learning process and the experimentation process of life itself. Um, and then it's important because I think, you know, once you combine, in my mind, once you combine these two facts, that we have these two aspects of our identity, thought and action, that we need to take, but that we don't really know necessarily, at least when we come into the world, what's the proper path for each of them or how to use them, then the only way to figure that out is to have the freedom to experiment and to trial and error. And so to me, that gives the kind of fundamental metaphysical framework or architecture and justification for why we then need the political freedom to think and to act, because the only thing that really stops you from doing either of those two actions is some form of physical or mental coercion. And so while there are many forms of coercion, obviously, in life, they don't all come from the government. The purpose of government, given the tie back to our political project here, is to create the conditions for which human beings can survive and flourish with each other in a social context. And so certainly when it comes to politics, we're all about creating the conditions for us to be our most human nature at our best, which means having the freedom to think and to act politically, so that then ultimately we can do that, metaphysically or kind of in our own life, practically day to day.
And I know we're going to have so much more to say about this as we explore this topic more in depth and as we get even to the third section of our statement, where we're really thinking about, okay, what are even the political structures that are necessary to put in place to give us this system that maximizes freedom, that maximizes rights, so that it's, each individual has their rights protected without being trampled upon or encroached upon by others. And we clearly have so much more to say about that down the road. But one point that I wanted to make sure that we were going to stress here is on this topic of thinking about freedom to think and freedom to act, our audience might know that with our project 1776 Forward, we've identified free speech and free markets, as we like to refer to them, as the two levers. And I really do think that they are the key leverage points, that if you can create a system where there is this appreciation and recognition for free speech and for free markets, that this is really what can give you the most leverage to live a life of freedom. And there's an interesting way in which sometimes perhaps it might seem that free speech lies along the dimension of freedom of thought. Certainly, if people are watching our other show, maybe we should give a plug for our Free Speech Forward podcast. That certainly one of the themes that comes up over and over again in that show is the recognition that free speech is so vital, because free speech really is the ability to think freely, that if we cannot speak freely, we cannot think freely. And then on the flip side, it might seem that, okay, free markets, that's our ability to act, to create, to collaborate and trade and exchange with each other in the world. And so it might seem like there's this dichotomy between speech and thought and markets and action. But as you've been pointing out all day here, it really always is both and. Because of course, even freedom of speech, there is no speech without, I mean, the word speech without your mouth, your tongue,
Right.
your voice. And even, if you're inscribing onto a paper, or even in our digital world, there has to be, the cloud has to be connected ultimately to something physical.
It
So,
is still
our,
physical data
and
centers.
and
Yeah.
there is a real way in which, if our abstractions and our concepts are divorced from real embodied experience, they become, as far as I'm concerned, worthless. That's kind of maybe something else we've been talking about here, that there really needs to be this integration between our thought and our embodied lived experience of the world. And then vice versa, free markets are, all right, so you might think of the bustling, energetic physical activity of the marketplace, but all of that is dependent upon a creator who has spent time thinking through. As perhaps anybody here who has ever had, done the entrepreneurial work of building a business or dreaming one up, how much mental work goes into figuring out, solving a problem. Entrepreneurship, we always talk that, entrepreneurship is all about problem solving, and that involves both something that is mental, figuring something out, and then actually doing something in the world to
Yes.
fix whatever the problem is, or create whatever the dream and the desire is out in the world. So again, so even though it's just another beautiful expression of how free speech and free markets are always both and
Yeah.
mind and body.
Right. Well, and that's why we chose both, is that they together, they express, you might say they each lean towards one side or another, and that's why we need to bring them both together to cover both. But even within each action, they are expressions of both our mental and our physical natures and capacities. So I love how you said that. Thank you for just summarizing that well. I don't really have anything to add, although I loved your plug at the end for entrepreneurship, because I think that is, I mean, we're obviously biased, Joy and I, in that we're traveling that path. But as we have said in the past, and we will continually emphasize here, I think both of our respective independent and shared visions of what entrepreneurship entails is the widest, most expansive
Mhm,
conception of, it's not just being in business, for
mhm,
profit making enterprises, as great as that is, it's any type of new effort or organization or product, and I use that in the broadest sense of the term, create entity existent that you bring into the world to solve a problem and to create new value in the world, whether it's a nonprofit organization, a charitable activity, an artistic one, a familial and relationship one, romantic, or in a business and materialistic one, whatever the case is, any act of original creativity to solve human problems is what we mean by entrepreneurship. And I just think, and that's why we are such proponents of it and have chosen that path ourselves, is because in so many ways it is this beautiful kind of high point in human endeavors and activities of integrating both our mental and our physical capacities. So with that, why don't we, unless you have any closing thoughts, we can just go right into our call to action.
No, thank you for that clarification on entrepreneurship. As I like to say, I always think of being entrepreneurial. It's all about just starting up a new initiative in a way that is both mission driven and results oriented. That if you had this sort of like starting up something new, being mission driven, being results oriented, that's what we mean by entrepreneurial. And I love how you pointed out that this applies so much more than just business. And we might even need a whole episode to explore why the entrepreneurial approach is so important beyond just business. My business is, of course, is a beautiful expression of entrepreneurship, but it can mean so much more. But I
I
want to
like
even
that.
tie it
Why don't we
back
do
to
that then?
we
Let's
will
put a
have to
pin
do
in
that.
that, as we say.
Put a
A
pin in
pin
that one.
section.
But
Yes.
I wanted to even, I think you created a beautiful segue by pointing out how perhaps it seems that free speech and free markets lean one way or the other, but that we always need to think about the integration. And I think that's a beautiful segue to our call to action this time, which we're going to ask people to think about an activity, a habit in your life that perhaps seems to lean toward either one of these dimensions, mind or body, and what you can do to perhaps bring the appreciation of the integration of mind and body to that activity. And I will share one of the favorite, beautiful little lessons that I've learned that comes from martial arts masters. They have this saying that if the body is weak, you start by training the mind, and if the mind is weak, you start by training the body. So I will leave that with you too, that that if you feel that there is sort of an imbalance within yourself, like as Chris has pointed out, we live in a culture where, some people are the nerds and some people are the jocks, but like where are the human beings that are fully empowered both mentally and physically? So if you find that in your own life you perhaps have leaned toward one of these poles to, as I say, like the body is weak, start with the mind. If the mind is weak, start with the body and think about how then you can bring mind and body into more harmony.
I love it. And one I will definitely be practicing as well, because I know there are plenty of areas of my own life where I could still use to practice this balance better and find better balance for what is otherwise an imbalanced relationship. So, or habit. So thank you for that. I look forward to hearing everyone else's thoughts. As always, please share them with us. That's feedback is what fuels us and allows us to make sure that we are speaking to what matters to you, and hopefully helping answer questions as you go on this journey of life like we are. So that's what this is all about: freedom, flourishing, and greatness, ultimately. So thank you for your time, and we will see you all again in 2 weeks, where we will move into our next both and polarity or duality of reason and emotion, which we kind of touched upon it in this last session, but is kind of almost, you could say, the next extension or expression of this mind body polarity. So see you next time.
See you then.